So in this section, we're going to start the demonstrations, and I'm going to be showing you the changes in the existing code editor. This will cover new tabs and buttons, such as the selection for VB scripts and C# options, syntax checking, compilation. We'll talk about sample C# code, new inbuilt app designer functions that come with C#. I'll also try to introduce you to some of the vocabulary used in C# programming so that it becomes a little bit easier for you to understand. We'll talk about compilation and how to handle compile errors, and then we'll also be talking about copying C# apps, which is slightly different from being able to copy VB script apps. So with that said, we'll nip over and we will start working in App Designer and build ourselves a couple of applications. Okay, so we're in Application Designer now. You should all be very, very familiar with this. And I've knocked up a very trivial app. So we have got a form here with a couple of fields in, first name and last name, an application level toolbar with fundamentally a single button at the moment, which we will wire up to run some code to populate these fields. But whilst it's being a trivial app, it will allow us to explore the editor. So let's go and load the editor. Now, the first thing that happens when the editor loads for a brand new application is it will default the language option here, this bit here, to C#. You'll see that we get an option to run VB script here as well. I'll just explain a couple of other bits and pieces which are some quite useful. With C# selected, our syntax checker has two options. We can syntax check the C# and indeed the VB script. And we also have a new function we call prettify code. One of the things that no doubt you will have come across is that the editor in App Designer sometimes gets confused with spaces and tabs and indents things oddly. But if you press prettify code, it will sort that out and make it all indented properly. You'll also notice that although we've set C# as the programming language, our events are exactly the same, initialization, on exit, on user, and so on like that. We would see as we build stuff here, we will see procedures in our procedure list here, and we've still got the standard code generation. And all these code generation functions, which calling a business object, executing a workflow, and so on, are aware that it's C# they've got to generate, and will insert the correct code as we're going along. So just a couple of other things. If we select VB script, you'll find that it will pop up the traditional VB script editor, and we can type in. Typically, I start off with option explicit and so on like that. And if you nip back and select C#, that's great. Now, the reason that two tabs come up when we're doing that is often you may well load an application that's already VB script. So the VB script tab will come up, you select C#, and then the conversion tools, which we'll see a little bit later on, will allow us to take the code from this tab and generate the C# code over here. In this instance, though, I only want it C# because it's a brand new application. I don't have any VB script, and I don't want that tab there. So the simplest thing to do is go over here to our control here, go to panes, and just unclick VB script, and of course it will disappear. So that's just bog standard Syspro pane handling. Let's have a quick look at some of the vocabulary now and what is actually happening. So those of you who are familiar with C# will immediately see that the program or the application name we named, or I named as CS, C# Demo 1, is now the namespace. Now, for those of you not familiar with C#, this is the overarching description, probably the easiest way of doing of the program. And within that namespace, there is a class called CS-Dem1, and what this is doing is inheriting characteristics from a library called Syspro Custom Applications. Up here, we've got a series of what we call using statements, which is basically saying when you are writing the C# code, I want the compiler to be aware that I will be referencing information in the following field. So the question is, where does one get that information from? If we nip over to the right-hand side here, because we're in C#, we have a new tab called Project References. And if we click Project References here, we'll see that there's a series of links to other class libraries, which we call a common reference, and we'll be discussing these in a bit more detail. But these common references are ones which the scripting engine, or rather the application designer, needs to reference. Maybe it's handling XML, maybe it's doing SQL queries and so on like that. So we'll be discussing this further. So let's start with a little bit of code. Those of you who've been through some of the other courses that we've done won't be surprised in the kind of syntax that I'll be using. But first of all, let's start with picking up an on-initialization event. So what this is basically saying is that we now have got a method or an event called on-initialization. Up here, however, I like to define, to make the code readable, some constants. So the constant, or to define a constant, is very similar to VBScript. It's the word constant. Remember, we have to tell it what type it is. It's a string. I'm going to call this main form, and it's going to be equal to the name of the form. So let me just stop that there. We'll just save this a minute. Oops, now we're going to get an error, but this is actually quite good. So on saving it, it's automatically compiled what we've actually done, and it's thrown up the fact that there is a syntax error somewhere in my code, giving me an option to say, do I want to continue or not? And if I say, do you want to save the source code, I'll just cancel that, and we come down here. Oops. You just go back that way. And what it's saying here in my errors and warnings is semicolon was expected on line 13. And if we double click that line, it will take us to line 13. And sure enough, I've forgotten to put the semicolon on the end. So we save that. Just bear with me whilst I go back to this form here. What I'm looking for is its name, CSDEM1F0. CSDEM1F0. Remember that. So what we'll do here is CSDEM1F0. This is just to make it easier for me a little bit later on. So what we could do here, form constants, and what we'll do is toolbar. These are just comment lines just to help us on our way. So we want a constant string, and I'm going to call it button run code, and its value is going to be 01002. I think, check that in a minute. So what we're going to be doing now is on initialization. What we want to be able to do is force some values into our form. So we will simply go to our form callouts, just the same as before. We'll come down here, we set value. That's our form, and that's where it will do. So what it's asking for is in that form. Well, that's what we're going to be doing now. I like to do this. Now this might seem a little bit overkill with our one trivial little form, but recently I've been working on a project when I think there were about 8 or 9 different forms, and it was very, very easy to get lost with these codes. So this is where I started to develop this idea of having constants for form names, so it makes it easier to read. Our caption here will be first name, and the string that we want in here, we just put me in there, shall we? Which is good. Now, as it happens, we want to do the last name as well, so I'm going to cheat a little bit here, and we'll just do that. And we'll go last name. Oops. And we're going to do that. So at the moment then, all we've got to do is it's going to fire up and populate, let me just make that capital, our form. So we can simply save it, in which case what it's doing now is compiling and saving and keeping us in the editor, or we can simply say save and exit. It will compile it and take us back to our editor. Now, clearly what we're going to be doing now is we will run the application to test it. Overwrite the txt file. Remember that the application designer creates .txt files, and the txt file will hold the compile. And you can see that it's done exactly what it did in the VB script. It's just put my name in these two fields. So on initialization, the Syspro callout functions haven't changed at all. It's just done exactly what you'd expect. So let's go back to our editor and have a quick look at what else we want to do. So what we'll do is come down here a little bit, and we will want our on-user event. And it's exactly the same as in VB script, but obviously some of the syntaxes here, you can see it's injecting some samples on here. Now, as it happens, I do have in another screen over here some code. So I'm going to, rather than bore you to tears, we're just going to copy and paste some of this. So first of all, I'm defining some variables. These are all strings, and they are being initialized with nothing in them. There are different ways of doing that. And then I'm just grabbing another piece of code here. Copy. I'm just going to shove it in here, and I'll explain to you what it does. Okay. And if you, at any stage, you start to lose the tabs and things like that, if we just simply say pretty code, it'll tidy it up to get rid of the white space and so on. So basically what we have, just as before, we have an app designer on user event. So in this instance, I'm saying if the event type that has fired is a toolbar event. Syntax is slightly different in CSharp. Remember, you know, these open close brackets. The select case statement now is a switch case statement in CSharp. So I'm saying if the event ID is equivalent to the button run code, which is that variable there, then what I'd like you to do is put whatever value is in the form in first name in that variable. In that variable, I'm going to have a variable called full name, which is the first name space last name. I'm building up a message, and then I'm just simply banging out something called a Syspro message box. Now, the Syspro message box is a new built-in function. You'll see it down here. And basically, it harnesses a standard control within Syspro that just makes it simpler for you to bang up message boxes. You can see here that we have contents, titles. This is different from the task dialog, which you'll see in the common controls higher up, and you can get return information back from which buttons are pressed. You've also got an input box, so it just makes it a little bit easier here. So basically what's going to happen is we're going to be pressing this button, and it's going to pop this information in, bang up a message box, and away we go. So let's save that, and we will run our code. And pop this, and up we come with our Syspro message box. And remember what I was actually saying earlier on about the inheritance of things like the length. So in the code, and I didn't point it out, but we'll have a look in a minute. One of the things I've got is say, well, how long is that string? And it's saying it's 11 characters long for us without us having actually to do anything about it. So that's the very, very trivial start to what we actually want to do. And in our next bit of a demo, we're going to be adding a little bit more functionality, but at least it gives you a feel for what's actually going on. In this second demonstration, what I'd like to do is expand on our little demo to illustrate some of the C# programming techniques, and also to elaborate on some of the changes to the editor. So here we are back in our little app. I've added another button here, and we'll just go into our editor and have a look. Now with the code, I've made some deliberate errors in the code so that we can see that the when we compile, we're going to get thrown some errors, and we'll go through that as well. So before we do anything, I'm just simply going to do a syntax check on here, and we'll see that the compiler is run and it's now throwing out the errors as we saw before. So what we'll do is we'll double click on here, and there's our one where we'd forgotten to put the semicolon on, and you'll see that if we do another syntax check, it will clear that error because we've fixed it and then move on. You don't have to compile between fixing each one. It's just to illustrate that as soon as you do fix it, it goes away. Now, so our next one here is saying control cannot fall out of switch from final case label, and it's saying case button. So that's the case statement, and you're sort of thinking, what on earth does that mean? Let's double click on there and have a look. What we can see in a case statement, let me just run that back there, is that a case statement starts with, or switch case switch. What are we checking with event ID? We're looking for the event ID, and if it equals to the button code, the syntax is button code colon, and then it finishes with break semicolon. And what this is trying to say to you is I've got a case statement, button use person class, but I can't find the break statement. And it's what trying to say to you, unless I can hit the break statement, I'm just going to fall through, and I can't, and it can't work. And we'll see that if I just simply knock that out. So part and parcel of looking at the compile errors is learning the error messages. And once you get familiar with those error messages, fixing these sorts of things is very, very easy. And again, we can run our compilation. So here we got name Syspro message box does not exist in the current context. That seems a bit odd because clearly it does. It's on line 46. So let's go and have a quick look. And straight away, I can see two things on here. First of all, A, we've got the error message, but B, Syspro message box isn't in blue. And if the editor recognizes any of the inbuilt functions, which were down here, if you remember, on the right-hand side, they will go blue, and this one isn't. And if we have a closer look, you'll see that I spelt Syspro wrong. And if we do that, A, it goes blue, so the editor recognizes it as a command. And if we do a syntax check, that will clear it as well. So now we are left with two errors which seem very, very odd, because what it's saying is the type or namespace person cannot be found. So we have to have a look here, and you can see in my code I'm referring to a variable called P, and the data type of P is something called person, whereas up here it was string. This is called person. You're saying, what on earth does that mean? So let's go and have a look at that. I wanted to force this kind of error message to explain something that isn't immediately obvious in the C# scripting. Our app is called CSC, or rather CSDEM2. It's got a namespace, and the namespace also has a primary class called CSDEM2. So at first glance, you would say, right, well, I understand these two have got to be the same, and therefore all my code goes inside this class, and hey presto, just like VBScript, I understand it all. Well, it isn't quite like that, because the programming techniques within C# is more object orientated, and the idea there is that you would break up your code into functional classes. You can do this in VBScript using the class statement, and you can set a variable to an instance of the class. But typically, most people with VBScript tend to write their code in one great long logical execution, one line after another, and it becomes quite difficult to read. So in this instance, what we can do, though, is we can actually have multiple classes inside our namespace, and our program can reference them. So if we come down to the bottom here, and I've got some code earlier on. So if I paste this now, what I'm saying here now is I've got a public class called CSDEM2, which is my app. And therefore, when the app actually runs from Syspro, Syspro will say, I am looking for a C# bit of code of namespace CSDEM2, public class CSDEM2. I am now going to start to run that code. Inside my namespace, I've now declared another class called person. And this class has a public string called first name, and it's initialized as an empty string, a last name as, and again, initialized as empty string. And it's got a public method called say hello. So, and when I invoke that method, it's going to return the string, and that's what that's doing there, that string, which will start hello, first name, last name, and it's very, very simple. Now, if we actually do a syntax check on here, our errors go, because of course now my code understands what the data type or the class of person is, because it's down here. The reason I wanted to illustrate this is that whilst I kept it very, very trivial, the approach for object orientation is that if you've got something that is doing a data manipulation, calculations or anything like that, the best way of approaching it is to break it into small classes specifically to handle that bit of logic, and then you can refer to it in your code. So as an example here, what we're saying is when I press the button use person class, I want you to create a variable called P of type person, and the new statement says I want you to create a new variable of this class. And when you've done that, I want to set the first name of P to be whatever is in the first name field on my form. I want the last name of P to be whatever's in my form. And then what I'd like you to do is run the method say hello and put the answer into my variable called MSG, just message. So if we understand it correctly, message then will have the words hello Andy Latham in there. And then what we're saying is Syspro message box, bang the message out, and it will go. So let's have a quick look at that. And we will run our code. Okay, so here is our code. We know that on initializing, it's put my name in there. If we do our original one, which was run code, it said full name Andy Latham, and we used the length property to tell me it's 11 characters long. And if I use this button now, it's going to use our person class, and there is our method coming back. So that's just a simple illustration of a change in programming style from VBScript to C#. So I just want to nip back now and have a look at a couple of other things in the editor. So here we are back in the editor, and what I want to show you is a bit more about the built-in functions and how you can work out what their syntax are. So the built-in functions were in our call out functions tab down at the bottom here, and we've been using Syspro message box here, and we can see in the syntax that the first variable is the content, then the title, instruction, text, fairly straightforward. And then we've got two variables defining the buttons, Syspro buttons OK, and the icons. And the idea behind these call out functions is that if you press a button, it will return a value to your program, and you can therefore trap the response back from the message box that's being displayed. Now, what the text here says is that if, for instance, I press the OK, it'll return 1, and if I press no, it'll return 4. But the question then says, well, what other variables fit into for the buttons and for the icons? Now we can find these down here in the enumerable section, and this is the buttons, enumerables, and the icons. And what these are standard variables with standard fixed values. So if, for instance, I want to change my Syspro message box to have an OK or a yes, no option, I come down here and see that if I set this variable to Syspro buttons.yes, no, let's do that. Yes, no. And then if I want, say, an information icon, I just simply set it to Syspro icons.information. So we will do that here. Formation. Just as an aside, I think if we take that, we can delete that. And if we just simply double click that, it will say which ones do you want, and I want an information one. It'll pop it in there as well. So it, short, you can either type it or you can take shortcuts there. We'll save it. So that's compiling it at the moment, and we can run our code now. Okay, and if we just do I use person, we can see there's our icon, and now we've got a yes, no buttons. And if I press those, they will return the value and so on like that, just as I said. So I'm just going to nip back now into the editor and cover off some of the sample snippets. Just as with the VB script scripting, on the sample code tab here, if we do a refresh samples, it reads the samples from the relevant text files. Don't forget that you can actually add your own snippets if you want to. And what you'll find is in this file is it's split into the two languages, C# and the VB script. And because we're in C# language here, it's only showing the C# snippets. There are some samples of the Syspro message box and how to use an input box. Quite a useful one there where it strings together all the on user event variables into one message. So you might want to put those out in maybe a debug message or something like that. There are some sample using statements here. So if I just scroll down here, we'll come clear of our program because I'm going to delete it and just have a look here. Oops. And this is an explanation of what all the the most commonly used using statements do. And these would appear at the top here if you were using it. So as an example, if I wanted to use string builder, a string builder class in my code, then I must reference the system.text class, and therefore I'm using system.text. So and a bit of an explanation of what they're doing. So we'll get rid of those. There's a log file class there, an example of how you actually write it to a file. There's a sample switch statement here. Again, if I just pop it here, then we double click that, you get the idea of I'm looking for an event ID, I'm looking for a button. And as we saw earlier on, it's look for a value with a colon on the end and do some code, hit the break with a semicolon. And this is quite interesting. If all else fails, in that the switch statement can't find any of the values it's looking for, you can put a default message on there and catch all the other issues. All this kind of syntax, though, is readily available on the internet. Just simply type in C# and a description of what you want to do, and you'll find loads and loads of examples. So that's a quick blast through those bits as well. What I'd like to do now is discuss with you the use of external classes being used within our C# scripting. So far in our demonstration, we created a class called person. There are properties, there's our method, and it worked fine in our demonstration. But what happens if we want to use this class in multiple apps? One option, I guess, would be that you simply cut and paste this code and bob it in each of the apps and it will work fine. Until, of course, you get to a point where somebody comes along and says, oh, will you add a couple of extra properties and a couple of extra methods and change the logic, the way it works? And all of a sudden, you've now got to change half a dozen apps to using this class. So logic says that there has to be a way of being able to create an external class or class library and reference it. So what we'll do at the moment is I'm going to delete this class here. We'll run our syntax check, and we can see our errors, which we expect because we just deleted the class, so it knows nothing about it. So we need a mechanism now of creating an external class. Now, there are a number of ways of doing it. You could use Visual Studio, which is a Microsoft licensable product. You could use Visual Studio Code, which is a Microsoft free of charge product. It's a lightweight version of Visual Studio, and I'll discuss these a little bit later on because we'll be using Visual Studio for debugging. But to just show you what I mean, this is the Visual Studio code. It's C#, as you'd expect. I've given it a namespace of employee. There's my class called person. There's my two properties, and there's my say hello. And I've changed the return string so that you can see it's actually coming from here. And we compile it. It will create a file called a DLL file, or .dll, and you save it somewhere sensible. So once we've done that, what we're able to do within App Designer is go to the project reference here. We can now add a reference, and it will say, well, where do you want to browse and where have you put the DLL file? And you can see that here's my employee DLL. I click that and say open, and it will put it into my reference list, and it's got a path. Now we sort of say, right, well, that's fine. It knows where the DLL is. It's got the class in it. I'll recompile, and it should work beautifully, and it doesn't. So what we have to do, and what we have to remember, is at this stage, whilst our C# scripting understands that we've got a reference to employee.dll, and it says you referenced a class called person, there's nothing to say where is that class. And what we have to do here is saying using employee. Now this is the namespace. It just happens to be the same as the DLL name, but this is the namespace. And now if we do syntax check, it'll clear, because what we said to the compiler is you will find the person class in employee. So what we'll do now is we'll save it, and we will run our code. And here we are. And if we pop our use person class, we can see now that our return value is the one that I changed it to show you that it's coming from employee.person. So that's actually how you link external DLLs. Now, the other advantage of this is often when you are integrating to third-party products, they may well find or provide a series of class libraries which you can link in directly into your C# code. So from here, I'm just going to nip back into the source code and show you one or two other things. Okay, so we're back in the source code now, and I want to discuss a little bit more about these references. I'm going to delete this one. All you've got to do to delete a reference is highlight it, press delete, and it will get it removed from the list view. Just a word of caution, it will be removed from the source code when you get a clean compile. So if from now and I go here and I get errors, and then I go to save, and it says, do you want to save the source code? And I say yes. It'll save the source code, but because it hasn't done a clean compile, it will remember that reference. So just a little bit of caution on there. So we're going to add this employee DLL back again, and there are a couple of things I want to talk about. First of all, its location. For the sake of the demonstration, bobbed it into base settings, App Designer resources. Those of you who've seen the earlier App Designer videos may remember that resources is one of the few directories in Syspro that is not synchronized back to the server because they're seen as a developer only folder for project creation. And therefore, if you were to create your own DLL and wanted Syspro to synchronize it back to the server and self-heal to other Syspro clients, then you'd need to put it into some folder like App Designer or Managed Assemblies folder, and then Syspro will deploy it for you. The other alternative, of course, is that you've got your own installation project and that you installed your own software on each of the laptops that actually need it. So what we're going to do is select it again. And one of the things which I deliberately missed off was this checkbox here. It's called global. At the moment, with it set as it is, with just the reference to employee and the path name, it is this app that will reference the employee.dll. If I click the global checkbox, then every single app that I create from here on in will have this reference in it. And what happens is the reference information is stored in the Syspro DB ADM script reference table, and every time a new app is created, as well as these common references which the app designer is pulling in automatically, it will add any of the global ones that you have defined that you want in your apps. So if we just check that, we'll run the syntax check and it will all work. So just to recap then, there are three types of references. The common reference, which is the ones in blue, which are the ones provided or supplied by App Designer, and without those, App Designer just won't work. Global references, which are your user reference class libraries that will automatically be pulled into any new app that you create. And then the application level ones, which is the ones that we just added to this application without checking the global checkbox. So that more or less wraps up the this part about references. Before we go on to the next section, I just wanted to spend a little bit more time in the editor itself. Now, the editor is actually a code block control which Syspro utilize. It's a generic editor, and although it understands the syntax of VBScript and CSharp, it doesn't have the capability of IntelliSense, where the editor itself prompts the user with the rest of the command and so on like that. And those of you who've used it for a length of time will understand that it's got its foibles. It indents things oddly every now and again, and so on like that. Now, as it happens, Syspro are working on alternatives, but for the time being, we are in a position where we've got to make do. So I just thought I would pass on one or two tips that I found whilst I've been coding. So here we are back in our demo script. Which you should recognize. Now, one of the first things that isn't immediate obvious is that if I right click, or if I do something like this and right click, one option I've got is to comment and uncomment. And if I do comment, it will put the double slashes in front and therefore comment out big chunks of code for us, which is quite a useful way. And if I highlight it again, right click and uncomment, and it will put it back in again. So it's quite a neat way of chopping out chunks of your code, maybe you're testing or something like that. Secondly, though, what you'll also notice is that there's a little, in this case, a minus sign next to the open brackets. And if you press this, and we'll do this one on the switch case, it will collapse the code between the two open and closed brackets. And if you hover over the dots, it will give you a snapshot of what the code is inside. So as you are developing larger programs, and maybe you are creating methods and classes outside the normal class for the programs, it's quite useful to be able to collapse these so that they're not taking up a load of real estate and so on like that. Don't forget that procedure names will appear up in here. So as you start to add more and more methods in here and so on, it will appear in the procedures as well. So we will open that up again. And then finally, if you just to reiterate, there is a prettify option here for prettifying the code, so that if the editor does start to indent things oddly and so on, if you just click that, it will sort it all out for you. So those are sort of editor commands. So what I want to show you now is a little bit of programming style that I find helps me, and see where we go from there. So we're back in some source code, which I've modified from our demonstration to illustrate what the code would look like if we took no action about setting constants or any other programming techniques. So what we can see here as an example is that in the Syspro function form field set value, this is the form code for that form that the app knows. These are button event IDs and so on like that. And also one of the other things that you'll find when you're working with C#, because it's using these open and closed curly brackets to indicate code blocks, when you get to something like this at the end of, say, the on-user event, this row of ones, which one actually is for the on-user event? Now, you could collapse this, I suppose, and you'll say, all right, well, it must be the one that's in here, and therefore it's between that one and that one. But if you were trying to guess, you're sitting here, well, that one matches with that one, that matches with that one, that matches with that one. So I must be able to put some code in here as an example. So it's a bit of a pain all round. So what I wanted to do is show you some of the things that I do to try to make it more reasonable. And as the code gets longer and longer, and believe me, and maybe a lot of you have got huge VB script apps, these programs can be hundreds of lines long. So this becomes quite an issue. So I'm just going to move to another bit of code, and I'll be back shortly. So now I've got a version of the programs where I haven't got any code at all. And this is typically the position you are when you actually start. So one of the very first things I tend to do is something like this. So now I've got clear indication of where or what these curly brackets are. And if I start to put an event in, like on initialize and on user event, oops, that's an absolute classic there. I should have said if I do on initialize and then moved here and go on user event, you've got the same issue. So what I actually do is say end of on initialize, and here end of on user event. We'll do that. You get the idea, and if you don't want that, you can either delete it, or you could right click and uncomment it if you was so inclined. So we'll just get rid of that to make life a little bit easier for us. But you get the general idea. As I'm starting at the very, very early stages, I try to mark the most obvious end curly brackets so that as the code expands, I can see this. And I also tend to put comments up here about the author, what the code does. So date, author, oops, and a description. Oops, better do that. Description, and so on, because really you need to let people know exactly who wrote it, who's responsible for it, and what it's supposed to do. So that's the first step of what I try to get going. Now I'm back in our original demo, my demo 3, and you can see some of the things that I've put in. So I've got my little description at the top here. And in this instance now, you can see me going back to my old style that you see in the VB script videos of declaring constants for these variables that are going on. And of course, once you start to use things like this, these commands are actually more easily readable. Fairly straightforward if you've only got one form, but I think, as I mentioned earlier on, I was on an app the other week which was about 7 or 8 forms, and this was absolutely crucial to be able to work out. And particularly when you may have the same legend coming on 2 different forms, for stock code or customer as an example, you want to make absolutely sure you understand which one you're getting from which form. And you can see me putting these bits and pieces in here. So there are a number of aspects which can make your life a lot easier. And as I say, Syspro are addressing this, but these limitations are down to the CodeJock editor, and there's very little that can be done about it other than replacing the whole thing. So there are some little bit of guidance there. Well, that's the end of the code editor demos. I hope you found it useful. What we're going to do now is move on to debugging C# and seeing how we can make our life a little bit easier with that.